The wind screamed across the Alaskan ridge like something alive and hungry. 41 hours. That's how long Captain Brennan Keller had been awake when the radio finally crackled with a signal that wasn't static, wasn't interference, wasn't the ghost voices of a satellite constellation that had better things to do than save 9 men freezing to death in a crack in the earth. The voice on the other end was clean, professional, utterly disconnected from the reality of blood on ice and the smell of infection creeping into Private Liam Torres's leg wound. Thorne is en route to your position. ETA 90 minutes. Keller pressed his forehead against frozen rock. His lips were cracked so deep they bled when he spoke. The taste of copper mixed with the metallic bite of air, so cold it turned his lungs into bags of broken glass. Say again, he whispered. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Thorne, extreme long-range qualified. She's your option, Captain. Keller didn't respond right away. He looked across the narrow space they'd been trapped in for nearly 2 full days. Looked at Sergeant First Class Declan Reeves pressing a blood-soaked rag against Corporal Jackson Howell's shoulder. Howell hadn't screamed in 2 hours. That was worse than screaming. When a soldier stops complaining about pain, it means the body has started making decisions the mind no longer gets to vote on. They're sending us a sniper, Keller said. Reeves didn't look up. His hands kept pressure on Howell's shoulder with the mechanical consistency of a man who had stopped believing in outcomes and started believing only in process. One sniper, Reeves said, not a question, just confirmation that the universe remained committed to its fundamental absurdity. One sniper. What's the range to that bastard up there? Keller pulled the small notebook from his chest pocket. The pages were stiff with cold. The numbers written there looked like they belonged to someone else's nightmare. 3,218 meters. Reeves stopped pressing, just for a second, just long enough for blood to seep faster between his fingers. He turned his head slowly, like a man who just heard something too absurd to process without confirming it came from a real human mouth. 3,200 meters. That's what I said. And they're sending one shooter. That's what they said. Reeves went back to Howell's shoulder, pressed harder. Blood welled up and froze at the edges before it could drip. Then we're already dead. Nobody talked about how they got pinned. Not yet. The debrief would come later, if there was a later. But every man in that frozen crack knew exactly how it happened. They'd been moving along the ridgeline for 6 hours. Standard patrol pattern. Eyes on thermal. Comms check every 15 minutes. Everything by the book. The first shot came with no warning. No sound first. Just Private Torres dropping like someone had cut his strings. The bullet punched through his thigh plate and buried itself in muscle and bone. Torres was down and screaming before the sound of the shot arrived. A distant crack, barely louder than the wind. 11 seconds later, the second shot. Corporal Howell spun and hit the ice face first. The round had passed clean through his upper arm. In and out. The kind of wound that's survivable if you get to a hospital in the next few hours. The kind of wound that kills you slowly if you don't. That's when Keller knew. This wasn't random fire. This wasn't suppression. This was a marksman. A very good one. Working from elevation. Working from distance so extreme that sound and impact lived in different moments of time. Contact! Contact! Hi! 11 o'clock! Someone shouted. Keller didn't remember who. Didn't matter. There was nothing to shoot at. The high ground was over 3,000 meters away. A wall of white between them and whoever was up there. Whoever was taking his time, picking them apart. The shooter had thermal optics. That became clear fast. He could see their heat signatures through the blizzard like candles in a dark room. They couldn't see anything. Just wind, just snow, just the certainty that standing still meant dying and moving meant dying faster. Keller pulled them down into a crevice in the rock face. It wasn't a position, it was a grave with no lid, but it was the only place where the angle didn't work for the man above. Radio, Keller shouted. Get me comms now. Specialist Graham Webb was already working. His fingers were blue. The satellite uplink had frozen solid. He stripped a glove off to work the connections. Within 30 seconds, his fingertips were white. "Sir, I can't get a lock. The antenna housing is iced over." "Then break the ice." "I'm trying, sir. It's not the ice. It's the battery." Core temp dropped below operational threshold. A third shot cracked into the rock wall above them. The impact sent fragments exploding outward. A shard the size of a quarter sliced across Private Caleb Marsh's cheekbone. Blood ran down his jaw and froze before it reached his chin. Stopped mid-drip. Suspended. "He's bracketing us," Reeves said quietly. "He knows where we are. He's just reminding us." That was 36 hours ago. In 36 hours, 3 things happened that ground their hope down like a millstone turning grain into dust. First, the storm got worse. Winds sustained at 70 kilometers per hour. Visibility dropped to 15 meters. Temperature fell to minus 34 Celsius. Cold enough that exposed skin could develop frostbite in under 90 seconds. Cold enough that breathing felt like swallowing knives. Second, Torres's leg wound became infected. Not critically, not yet, but the color was wrong, gray at the edges, and Torres had stopped complaining about the pain. When a soldier stops complaining, it means the body is triaging itself, shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the core. Torres was disappearing from the inside out. Third, and worst of all, the sniper never left. Every few hours, a single round would crack into the rocks near their position. Not aimed to kill, aimed to remind. The message was clear and simple and terrifying in its patience. "I'm still here. You're still mine. Move, and I'll prove it." Psychological warfare, Reeves said on hour 28. Classic sniper doctrine. He doesn't need to kill us. He just needs to keep us here until we freeze. Keller knew Reeves was right. And that's what terrified him. Because the math was simple and brutal. They had food for maybe another day. Water wasn't a problem. They could melt snow. But calories were burning faster than they could replace them. Bodies were furnaces in the cold, and furnaces need fuel. Howell needed a surgeon. Torres needed antibiotics. And every hour they sat in that crevice, their core temperatures dropped another fraction of a degree. They weren't being hunted, they were being waited out. On hour 34, Webb finally got a signal. It lasted 11 minutes, barely enough, but Keller talked fast, and the operations center at Eielson listened. "We need precision fire on the high position. Coordinates follow." There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone on the other end is looking at someone else in the room, making decisions with eyes instead of words. "Captain, we've got 0 air assets available in this weather. No rotary, no fixed wing, no drone coverage. Ceilings at 200 feet. Winds aloft are exceeding safe flight parameters." "Then what do you have?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We have a shooter, Captain. Ground asset currently staged at forward operating point Echo, 14 clicks south of your position." Keller's chest tightened. One shooter. Against a marksman who had them pinned at over 3,000 meters in conditions that made helicopter flight impossible. Who? Staff Sergeant Evelyn Thorne, Specialty Asset, Extreme Long Range Program. Keller said nothing for 5 seconds. In combat communications, 5 seconds of silence is an eternity. "Is this a joke?" "Negative, sir. Thorne holds the highest qualification score in the ELR program this year. She's been deployed to this theater specifically for—" "I don't care about qualification scores," Keller cut in. His voice was raw. "I've got a shooter at 3,200 meters on a fortified position in the worst storm I've seen in 8 years in this army. You're telling me one person is going to fix this?" "She's your option, Captain. The only one until the weather breaks." "When does the weather break?" 48 hours, minimum." Keller looked at Torres. Torres's eyes were glassy. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. 48 hours. Torres didn't have 48 hours. Send her. She arrived at hour 41. Nobody heard her coming. That was the first thing that unsettled them. 9 men in a frozen crevice, all of them on edge, all of them trained, and she appeared like she'd grown out of the ice itself. White oversuit, white pack cover, white rifle wrap. Even her face was painted in broken patterns of gray and white. The only color on her was the pale blue of her eyes when she pulled the neck gaiter down. Staff Sergeant Thorne reporting. Not loud, not soft, just factual, like she was checking in for a shift. Keller stared at her. She was smaller than he expected. 5'6", maybe 5'7". Lean, but not in the wiry way of infantry soldiers. More like a distance runner. Controlled economy, nothing wasted. She carried the rifle across her back in a drag bag. Even wrapped, Keller could tell it was long. Longer than standard issue. The barrel extended past the bag's design length by several inches. The weapon had presence. Weight. The kind of thing you felt in a room even before you saw it. "Captain Keller," she said when he didn't respond. "Yeah, that's me." His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Disconnected. "Brief me." It wasn't a request. Keller briefed her. He kept it tight. Situation, enemy position, friendly casualties, failed attempts at extraction, the pattern of harassment fire, the psychological warfare, everything that mattered and nothing that didn't. Thorne listened without expression. She didn't nod. She didn't react. She just absorbed. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. Elevation difference? Approximately 410 meters. He's above us. Time between his shots? Random intervals, but the harassment rounds come every 3 to 5 hours. Wind pattern at your level? Keller hesitated. You can feel it. Sustained 60 to 70 from the northwest. I don't mean feel, she said. I mean measured. Silence. Lieutenant Owen Braddock leaned forward from his spot against the rock wall. 24 years old, West Point, first deployment. The kind of officer who still believed there were right answers to every question. "Sergeant," Braddock said, "the distance to that position is over 3,200 meters. In a blizzard. With crosswinds we can't even accurately measure. You're talking about a shot that's physically..." "Physically what?" Thorne said. Braddock blinked. "Impossible." Thorne looked at him the way a math teacher looks at a student who just confidently announced that 2 + 2 = 5. Not angry, not offended, just noting an error. "The Barrett record is 2,800 meters, she said. The ShyTac system I carry was designed for engagements past 3,000. The .408 round maintains supersonic flight to 3,800 meters in standard atmosphere." "This isn't standard atmosphere," Braddock said. "It's cold, which means denser air, which means the round stays stable longer. The distance isn't the problem," she paused. "Wind is the problem. Wind is always the problem." She turned back to Keller. "I need a position with line of sight to the high ground, and I need 2 hours of observation before I take any shot." 2 hours, Reeves said from behind his blood-soaked hands. "We've got wounded, Sergeant. And if I miss because I rushed, you'll have more wounded. Or you'll have dead." She paused. 2 hours. Nobody argued. She set up 60 meters from the main group. At the far edge of the crevice, where a natural shelf in the rock gave her a narrow window to the high ground. The spot was exposed, partially. Enough that the enemy sniper could potentially see her heat signature if he was scanning that sector. "You sure about that position?" Keller asked. "I need the angle," she said. "This is the only place that gives me a clear ballistic path through the valley. You'll be exposed." "I know. If he sees you, then he'll shoot at me instead of your men." She looked at him directly, those pale eyes, cold as the ice. "That's an improvement, isn't it?" Keller opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "What do you need from us?" "Silence. Nobody moves. Nobody talks above a whisper. I need to hear the wind." "You need to hear the wind?" "The wind has layers, Captain. At this altitude, in this terrain, There are at least 3 distinct wind channels between me and that target. I can see 2 of them through thermal. The snow moves differently in each layer. She paused. But the third one, the one at mid-altitude, I can't see it. I can only hear it. She looked at him. That's the one that will make me miss. For 2 hours, Thorne lay on the ice shelf and did nothing visible. But inside her mind, she was solving an equation that most mathematicians would need a computer for. She noted the wind patterns through her thermal scope. The snow didn't fall straight. It moved in rivers, 3 rivers, one near the ground, moving right to left, one higher, maybe 500 meters up, moving left to right, and the third, the one she'd mentioned, somewhere in between, shifting, unpredictable. She wrote numbers on waterproof paper with a pencil, not digital, not electronic, pencil and paper, because electronics freeze, mathematics doesn't. Distance, 3,218 meters. Elevation angle, 8.1 degrees. Temperature, minus 34 Celsius at her position. Estimated minus 40 at mid-flight altitude. Barometric pressure dropping. The storm wasn't done. Humidity near 0. Dry cold, good for ballistics. Spindrift at this distance, 4.2 meters right. Coriolis effect, 1.1 meters. Negligible. But at this range, nothing was negligible. Bullet flight time, 5.8 seconds. 5.8 seconds. Most gunfights are decided in fractions of a second. A bullet at close range arrives before the sound of the shot. Even at long range, 1,000 meters, the flight time is barely over a second. But 5.8 seconds, that was an eternity. In 5.8 seconds, the wind could shift 3 times. The target could move. The temperature gradient along the bullet's path could change the air density enough to alter trajectory by meters. She wasn't shooting at a man. She was shooting at a point in space where she predicted a man would be in 5.8 seconds. Through an atmosphere she couldn't fully measure, across a distance most people couldn't even conceptualize, and she had to be right within 18 inches. Somewhere in the back of the crevice, Braddock whispered to Reeves, "She's just lying there." Reeves didn't look at the lieutenant. He was still working on Howell, who had gone pale in a way that scared him. "She's working. She's been lying there for an hour and a half. She hasn't fired. She hasn't moved." "She's working, sir." "How do you know?" Reeves finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and exhausted, but something hard lived behind them, something that had seen things Braddock hadn't. "Because I've been in the Army for 19 years, Lieutenant. And in 19 years, I've met exactly 3 people who scared me. Not because they were loud, not because they were big, because they were quiet in a way that meant something." He looked back at Howell. "She's the 4th. Braddock sat back against the rock. He didn't say anything else for a long time. At minute 104, Thorne made a small notation on her paper. 4 tiny marks, evenly spaced. She had found the pattern. The storm wasn't constant, it breathed. Every 21 to 23 minutes there was a brief period, maybe 15 to 20 seconds, where the mid-altitude wind dropped below half its sustained speed. Not a full lull, not calm, but enough of a reduction that the most unpredictable variable in her equation became semi-predictable. 4 observations, 4 windows, consistent timing. The 5th window would come in approximately 18 minutes. She began her final calculations. Barrel temperature had dropped 4 degrees since she'd set up. Cold steel, cold air. The propellant in the cartridge would burn slightly slower. Muzzle. Thorne had fired over 5,000 rounds through this exact barrel. She knew its resonance the way a cellist knows the voice of her instrument. Today, in this cold, the barrel would be stiffer. The harmonic would be tighter. The bullet would leave the muzzle fractionally higher than it would in normal conditions. She adjusted down by 1/10 of a mil. Nobody watching would have seen her move. But the recoil drove into her shoulder. Familiar, expected, absorbed. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She watched through the thermal scope. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The bullet passed through the first wind layer. 4 seconds, falling now. 62 meters below the original line of sight. 5 seconds. Spin drift pulling it right. Coriolis pulling it left. Gravity pulling it down. 5.8 seconds. The thermal signature on the high ground didn't move. Pulled the data. Wind had gusted 11, pulled the data. Wind had gusted 11 degrees off prediction at the moment of firing. A microburst, invisible, unforecastable. The bullet had passed left of the target by approximately 2 meters. 2 meters at 3,200. Most shooters on Earth couldn't land within 20 meters at that distance. She'd missed by 2. She adjusted. She wrote new numbers. She didn't speak, but something had changed. When the bullet impacted the rock near the enemy position, the enemy sniper reacted. He shifted, and then he fired back. The round cracked into the crevice wall above the main group, shattering rock, sending fragments into Marsh's face. Marsh screamed. Blood poured from a gash above his eye. "Medic!" someone yelled, but they had no medic, just Reeves and a first aid kit that was running low. The enemy now knew someone was shooting back, and the enemy now knew the approximate position. Thorne was exposed, and the next window was 21 minutes away. 21 minutes. Thorne counted the seconds in her head while simultaneously tracking 3 wind layers to her scope, monitoring the enemy's thermal signature for any position change, calculating the adjustment for the microburst pattern she'd now identified, and controlling her own body temperature to prevent shivering that could throw off her hold by even a fraction. Minute 7. The enemy sniper fired again. The round hit the ice shelf 3 meters to Thorne's left. Close. Too close. He was walking his shots toward her. She didn't move. Minute 12. Another round. This one passed over her head. She heard it, not the crack of the rifle, which came later, but the snap of the bullet breaking the sound barrier as it passed through the air above her. He was within 4 meters of her now. One more correction, and he'd have her. She didn't move. Minute 15. Reeves was watching through binoculars. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, from something else entirely. "She's not moving," he said to Keller. "He's shooting at her and she's not moving." "I know. He's going to hit her." "I know, and she knows," Keller nodded. "She's waiting for the window. She won't shoot until the window opens, even if he kills her first." Reeves put the binoculars down. He stared at the ice between his boots. "God help us," he whispered. "She's not brave. She's certain." Minute 19. Thorne felt the air change before she saw it in the scope. A subtle shift in pressure against her left cheek. The wind was dropping at altitude. The 6th window was opening. She placed her finger on the trigger, not pressing, resting. Her adjustments were already dialed. 2 meters left correction. Additional 0.2 mil elevation for the temperature drop in the last 20 minutes. Spin drift recalculated for the slightly lower muzzle velocity of a barrel that had cooled further in the cold. Every variable accounted for, except one. She couldn't account for what the wind would do in the 6th second. No human could. All she could do was read the pattern, trust the math, and accept that the rest was physics. Minute 20. The snow shifted. The mid-altitude river slowed. Thorne breathed in, let half the breath go, between heartbeats. In that ancient silence that exists between one pulse and the next, she broke the trigger. The crack was enormous. It echoed off the walls of the valley like the voice of something old and angry. 1 second, 2 seconds. She didn't pray, she didn't hope, she watched. 3 seconds. The bullet entered the mid-altitude wind layer. This time the layer was quiet. 4 seconds. Falling 62 meters below line of sight, exactly as calculated. 5 seconds. Spin drift compensated, Coriolis compensated, gravity compensated. 5.8 seconds. On the thermal scope, the bright white signature of the enemy sniper jerked violently. The shape collapsed sideways. It slid from the edge of the rock and dropped below the ridgeline. The glow faded. Then nothing. Absolute nothing. No return fire, no movement. No secondary heat moving to recover the body. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 3. The valley was silent except for the wind. And then Reeves's voice, raw and cracked and barely above a whisper. Hit. Confirmed hit. Nobody cheered. Nobody shouted. Nobody said a word. Keller sat down on the frozen ground. He put his hands on his knees. He breathed. Just breathed. The first full breath he'd taken in 41 hours. And 60 meters away, Evelyn Thorne pulled back from her scope, rolled onto her side, and began writing in her notebook, documenting the shot, because documentation was how you turn the impossible into a fact, and facts don't care who laughed. 14 minutes after the shot, the spotter on the enemy's high ground pulled back. Keller watched the thermal signature retreat over the ridgeline and disappear. No hesitation, no attempt to recover the body, just gone. That told him more than any intelligence report could. They were afraid now. One bullet, one single .408 caliber round fired through a blizzard across a distance most people couldn't drive in under 3 minutes, had collapsed an entire tactical position. Not because of the damage it did, because of what it proved. There was no safe distance anymore. Keller pulled out his field notes. Intelligence had identified the shooter 2 days before the ambush. Dmitry Volkov. Former Russian Olympic rifle team. Beijing, 2008, finished 4th in the 50-meter prone event. Career ended by shoulder injury. Current affiliation, private military contractor. Known for patience and precision. And now Volkov was dead, killed by a woman he'd never seen. At a distance he'd probably thought was impossible. The game hadn't just changed. The game was over. Keller pushed himself to his feet. His knees popped. His back screamed. 41 hours on frozen rock had turned his body into something that felt 60 years old instead of 34. Reeves. Sir, get Torres stabilized for transport. The moment this storm breaks enough for a bird, I want him ready. Already on it. Reeves paused. His hands were still bloody, dark red against white ice. Captain. What? You should talk to her. Keller looked toward Thorne's position. She was still lying on the ice shelf, still writing, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just done something that would end up in a classified briefing at the Pentagon. Yeah, Keller said, I should. He crossed the 60 meters of frozen ground between them. The wind hit him full force as he left the shelter of the crevice. It was like walking into a wall of knives. By the time he reached her, his cheeks were numb. Thorne didn't look up when he approached. She was recording wind data, pencil moving in small, precise strokes across waterproof paper. Staff Sergeant, Captain, that was the most extraordinary piece of shooting I've ever witnessed. She stopped writing, looked up. Those pale blue eyes studied him for a moment. It was the second round, sir. First round missed. You missed by 2 meters at 3,200. A miss is a miss. Keller crouched beside her. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that matched the magnitude of what she'd done. But the words that came out were the words of a tired man who'd almost watched his people die. You saved my team. That's the job. No, that's not the job. The job was to attempt a shot. What you did was refuse to accept the word impossible. Those are different things. For the first time since she'd arrived, something shifted in Thorne's face. Not a smile, not gratitude, something deeper and harder to name. Recognition, maybe. The look of a person who had spent years being defined by what others thought she couldn't do. Hearing someone finally describe what she actually did. Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Sergeant. She went back to writing. Keller stood up, turned back toward his team, and stopped. Something had been bothering him since she arrived. something he couldn't leave without asking. Thorne, sir, when he was shooting at you, those last few minutes before your second shot, he was close. 4 meters from your position. Keller paused. You didn't move. No, sir. Why? Thorne capped her pencil. She tucked the notebook into her chest pocket and sat up slowly, pulling the rifle into her lap. Because if I moved, I'd lose my position. And if I lost my position, I'd have to recalculate everything. New angle, new wind read, new ballistic solution. She paused. That's another 2 hours. Your man Torres doesn't have 2 hours. So you stayed in the kill zone. I stayed where the math worked. Keller stared at her. And if he'd hit you, then you'd still be pinned down and Torres would probably die, and someone would write a report about a female sniper who got killed trying something stupid. She met his eyes. But he didn't hit me, because he was shooting at 3,000 meters too, and he didn't have my math. Keller thought about Volkov, about the intelligence photo showing a middle-aged man with gray at his temples and tired eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen too much, done too much. The kind of eyes that knew exactly what they were looking at when rounds started landing within 2 meters at over 3,000. Professional respect. That's what those last few shots had been. Not panic, not desperation. Respect. One master craftsman to another, across an impossible distance, in impossible conditions. And Thorne had won. Keller walked back to his team in silence. Halfway there, Reeves intercepted him. Well, she's writing in her notebook. That's it. That's it? Reeves shook his head slowly. 19 years, Captain. Never met anyone like her. 20 for me, Keller said. Same. 3 hours later, the storm broke. Just enough. 2 Black Hawks came in low through the valley, rotors beating against wind that tried to knock them sideways. Torres was loaded first, then Howell. Then the rest of them walked to the extraction point under their own power. Thorne walked alone, 30 meters behind the group. Nobody invited her to walk with them, and she didn't ask. She carried her rifle across her back and her data notebook in her chest pocket, and she moved through the snow like she'd been born in it, which Keller would later learn she nearly had been. At the landing zone, a medic approached Thorne with a thermal scanner and a clipboard. Staff Sergeant, I need to check your vitals before we load you. Thorne nodded, stood still while he worked. The medic's face changed as he read the scanner. Ma'am, when's the last time you ate? 1,800 yesterday. That's 40 hours. He checked the readout again. Your core temp is 94.5. That's hypothermia threshold. The medic scrolled to his tablet. According to your pre-deployment physical 3 weeks ago, your weight was 140 pounds. He looked at the scanner reading again. His voice dropped. You're currently 129. You've lost 11 pounds in 41 hours. Muscle catabolism, Thorne said. Her voice was flat, clinical. Body consuming itself for fuel. Expected outcome given caloric deficit and cold exposure. The medic stared at her. Ma'am, that's not... He stopped, looked at her face, realized she understood the numbers better than he did, understood what her body had done to keep her alive, understood the price. Yes, ma'am, that's exactly what it is. I'm aware you need immediate warming protocol. I'll handle it at Carson. The medic looked at her feet, at the way she was standing. Weight shifted slightly to one side. Ma'am, can you take your boots off? No. Why not? Because if I take them off, I won't get them back on. The medic knelt, unlaced her left boot carefully, pulled it off. The sock underneath was stuck to skin with dried blood. When he peeled it back, Keller saw the damage. Frostbite, grade 2, maybe 3. The tissue was white and waxy. Dead. Jesus Christ, the medic whispered. Ma'am, this is severe. Both feet? Yes. How long were you on that shelf? 2 hours and 21 minutes. The medic looked up at her. 6 more hours out there and you'd be dead. You understand that? Your body was shutting down. Organ failure. Rhabdomyolysis. Another 6 hours and we'd be loading you in a bag. Thorne's expression didn't change. But it didn't shut down, so here we are. The medic wrapped her feet carefully, helped her into the helicopter. As they lifted off, Keller watched Thorne through the open door. She was looking down at the ridgeline where she'd lain, where she'd waited, where she'd made a choice between mathematics and survival, and chosen mathematics. And Keller understood something then, something that would stay with him for the rest of his career. Bravery wasn't the right word for what he'd witnessed. Bravery implied uncertainty overcome by will. What Thorne had done was different. She hadn't overcome fear. She'd calculated it, measured it, and decided it was an acceptable variable in an equation that mattered more than her own life. That wasn't bravery. That was something colder, something more absolute. That was certainty. The flight to Fort Carson took 4 hours with a refueling stop. Thorne slept through most of it, or appeared to sleep. Keller suspected she was doing what she always did, processing, calculating, running numbers that never stopped moving through her head. When they landed, she was taken directly to medical. The rest of the team went to debrief. The debrief took place in a windowless conference room that smelled like coffee and stress. A Colonel Keller didn't recognize sat at the head of the table with a stack of reports and a look on his face that suggested he'd been reading things he didn't quite believe. "Captain Keller, glad you made it back." "Thank you, sir. I've read your preliminary report." The colonel tapped the papers. Staff Sergeant Thorne made a confirmed engagement at 3,218 meters. In blizzard conditions, sustained crosswinds 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. Temperature -34 Celsius. He looked up. "Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir." "One shot?" "Second shot, sir. First round missed by approximately 2 meters. The colonel leaned back in his chair. "Captain, do you understand what you're describing? The longest confirmed sniper kill on record is 2,800 meters. Staff Sergeant Thorne exceeded that by over 400 meters. In conditions that make the record shot look like a training exercise." "I'm aware, sir." "Where is she now?" "Medical, sir. Frostbite on both feet. Grade 2 to 3. Lost 11 pounds in 41 hours. Body was in early stages of hypothermic shutdown." The colonel's expression shifted. "She stayed in position long enough to sustain that level of damage?" "She stayed in position for 2 hours and 21 minutes, sir. Under direct fire for the last 15 minutes of that. The enemy sniper was walking rounds toward her position. He got within 3 meters. The room went quiet. Someone at the far end of the table, a Major Keller didn't know, spoke up. "She didn't move?" "No, sir." "Why not?" Keller thought about how to answer that, how to explain what he'd seen, what he'd felt watching Thorne lie motionless while bullets impacted close enough to throw ice chips onto her back. "She told me that if she moved, she'd lose her position. And if she lost her position, she'd have to recalculate her ballistic solution. That's 2 more hours. We didn't have 2 more hours." The colonel wrote something down. "So she chose the mission over her own safety?" "No, sir." Keller paused. "She chose the math. She stayed where the numbers worked. Everything else was secondary." The debrief continued for another hour. Questions about the enemy position, about Dmitry Volkov's known tactics, about the thermal signatures, about the timeline, about Torres and Howe, and whether the casualties could have been avoided. But Keller's mind kept drifting back to that ice shelf, to the woman lying in a kill zone with a pencil and paper, writing equations while death closed in by meters, while her body consumed itself, while frostbite ate through tissue that would never fully heal. When the debrief ended, Keller went to medical. He found Thorne in a recovery room. Her feet were elevated and wrapped, IV line in her arm pumping warmed saline. But she was awake, alert, writing in her notebook. "You're supposed to be resting," Keller said. "I'm documenting," Thorne said. "If I don't write it down now, I'll forget details." "The shot's over. You made it. You don't need to document anything else." "Yes, I do." She didn't look up. Because the next time someone tells me a shot is impossible, I need to be able to show them exactly why they're wrong, and that requires data. Keller pulled up a chair, sat down. Can I ask you something? Yes, sir. When you were lying there, when he was shooting at you, were you afraid? Thorne stopped writing. She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something other than calculation in her eyes. Something human. Yes, she said. I was afraid. But you stayed. Being afraid doesn't change the math, Captain. It just makes it harder to concentrate. Keller nodded. He didn't know what else to say to that. So he stood up, started to leave, stopped at the door. Thorne, sir, you should know, what you did up there, it's going to change things. For you, for the program, for a lot of people who thought certain things weren't possible. I hope you're right, sir. You don't sound convinced. Thorne went back to her notebook. I've been proving things are possible my entire life, Captain. People believe what they want to believe. The bullet doesn't care. The bullet only knows the math. 6 hours after they arrived at Fort Carson, while Thorne was still in medical, the operations center received new intelligence. Thermal surveillance from a satellite pass over the area where Keller's team had been trapped showed something unexpected. Heat signatures, multiple, moving on the ridgeline where Thorne had made her shot. Keller was called back to the operations center. The colonel was there, along with an intelligence officer and a drone operator who looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Captain, we've got movement on the high ground. At least 10 enemy personnel attempting to recover Volkov's body from the position where Thorne made her engagement. Keller looked at the screen, saw the signatures, counted them. They're exposed. Completely. It's like they don't think anyone's watching, or they think the shooter's gone. The colonel looked at Keller. Captain, you said Staff Sergeant Thorne is in medical? Yes, sir. She's being treated for frostbite and hypothermia. Can she shoot? Keller felt something cold move through his chest. Sir? Those signatures are at approximately 3,200 meters. If Thorne can engage from the medical facility's roof, we have an opportunity to eliminate a significant enemy element. They're attempting to recover Volkov. They're exposed. They're vulnerable. Sir, she's injured. She's lost 11 pounds. Her body was shutting down. I'm asking if she can shoot, Captain, not if she should. Keller looked at the screen again, at the heat signatures moving carelessly across the ridge. They thought they were safe, thought the threat was gone. They were recovering their dead, showing loyalty, showing courage, and someone wanted to kill them for it. I'll ask her, sir. He found Thorne exactly where he'd left her, still writing. The 4 was still in her arm. Her feet were still elevated. But when Keller explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. Get me to the roof. Thorne, you don't have to. Get me to the roof, Captain. Those men are at 3,200 meters. That's my range. You're injured. My hands work. My eyes work. The rifle works. She looked at him. The math doesn't care how much I weigh or whether my feet hurt. Neither do I. 20 minutes later, Thorne was prone on the roof of the medical building. Her rifle was set up on a makeshift rest made from sandbags. Her feet were still bandaged, still damaged, but her hands were steady. Keller spotted for her, calling out the thermal signatures as they moved across the ridge. 10 targets, spread over approximately 40 meters, range 3,205 to 3,240. Thorne adjusted her scope. Wind? Sustained 45 kilometers per hour, gusting to 60. Direction? Northwest, same as before. Temperature? -28, warming trend. Thorne nodded. She began her calculations, writing numbers on the same waterproof paper she'd used on the ice shelf. The math was different now. Slightly closer range, slightly warmer air, different humidity, but the fundamentals were the same. Distance, wind, temperature, gravity, time. Keller watched her work, watched her write, watched her become the thing she'd been the first time. A machine made of flesh and mathematics. A calculator that breathed. First target is stationary, Keller said. Center of the group. Range 3220. Thorne dialed her scope. Settled in behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed. Deeper. More controlled. She was entering that space again. That place where everything was numbers and nothing was fear. She fired. The recoil pushed against her shoulder. She absorbed it, stayed in the scope, watching. 5.7 seconds. The signature at the center of the group dropped, disappeared from thermal view. Hit, Keller said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Confirmed hit. The other signatures scattered, but not fast enough, not far enough. They were exposed on open ground with nowhere to hide. They'd come for their dead. Now they join him. Thorne worked methodically, adjusted for each new target, each new distance, each slight variation in wind and angle. She fired again, and again, and again. Each shot was a conversation between her and the rifle, between mathematics and reality, between prediction and outcome. And each time, the conversation ended the same way, with a signature disappearing from the thermal screen. Keller counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 8 minutes, 10 shots, 10 targets. When it was over, Thorne sat back from the rifle. Her face was pale, not from emotion, from exertion, from pushing a body that was already operating at the edge of its capacity. Her hands were shaking now, just slightly, the first sign of breakdown. "Staff Sergeant," Keller said, "are you? I need to go back to medical now." "Of course, I'll—" "Captain," she looked at him. Those pale blue eyes were dimmer now, tired. 11 total, including Volkov. 11 confirmed. "I'll make sure it's in the report. Thank you." They helped her back downstairs, back to the recovery room. The nurses were furious that she'd left, that she'd been shooting, that she'd been doing anything except lying still and letting her body heal. But Thorne didn't seem to hear them. She was writing in her notebook again, recording the data from the 10 new engagements, the distances, the conditions, the outcomes, documenting the impossible, making it real. The final debrief happened 2 days later. By then, satellite imagery had confirmed all 11 kills. The colonel who doubted the first shot wasn't doubting anymore. "Staff Sergeant Thorne," the colonel said. He was reading from a report that looked like it had been written by someone who still couldn't quite believe what they were typing. 11 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, in blizzard conditions, while suffering from hypothermia, severe muscle catabolism, and grade 2 to 3 frostbite on both feet. He looked up. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I completed my assignment, sir. You made shots that most people in this building would call impossible." "Impossible means the physics doesn't allow it, sir. The physics allowed it. It was just difficult." The colonel leaned back, exchanged a glance with his executive officer. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" And that was the question that changed everything. Because to understand the shots at 3,200 meters, you had to understand the woman who made them. And to understand the woman, you had to go back to a ranch in Wyoming where a 9-year-old girl picked up a rifle for the first time. And the world got quieter. But before Thorne could answer, the door opened. Lieutenant Braddock stepped in. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red. His jaw was tight. And he was standing with the rigid posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but I need to speak with Staff Sergeant Thorne." The colonel looked annoyed. "Lieutenant, we're in the middle of—" "I understand, sir, but this can't wait," the colonel sighed. "Make it quick." Braddock turned to Thorne. "Staff Sergeant, do you have a minute?" Thorne stood, followed him into the hallway. Keller watched through the open door. "Staff Sergeant," Braddock said. His voice was shaking. "I owe you an apology." "For what, Lieutenant?" For what I said, in the crevice, when you arrived, I called the shot impossible. I said it to your face, in front of the entire team. You did. I was wrong. Yes. Braddock waited. Clearly he expected more. Some form of absolution. Some generous statement about how anyone could have made the same assumption. Thorne gave him none of that. Lieutenant, can I ask you something? Of course. If Sergeant Dalton had walked into that crevice instead of me, 6'2", 220 pounds, 12 years in regiment, would you have said the same thing? Braddock opened his mouth, closed it. His face flushed red from the jawline up. I'd like to think. Don't think about it, just answer. The silence between them was brutal. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. An eternity for a man standing in front of a truth he couldn't escape. No, Braddock said quietly. I probably wouldn't have. Thorne nodded, not in anger, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. You misjudged the math, Lieutenant, not me. That's what you said, but that's not the whole truth. You misjudged the math because you misjudged me. And you misjudged me because of something that has nothing to do with mathematics or ballistics or wind. She shifted her weight off her damaged feet. I'm not angry. I stopped being angry about this a long time ago. But I want you to remember something. The next time you see someone who doesn't match the picture in your head, someone who's too young, too small, too female, too anything, remember this conversation. Remember what it cost you. What did it cost me? Credibility. Every man in that crevice heard you say impossible. And every one of them watched me prove you wrong. That's a story they'll tell for the rest of their careers. And you'll be in it. Not as the villain, just as the man who was wrong. She started to walk back to the conference room, stopped, turned around. Apology accepted, by the way. Braddock stood there for a long moment, for the next 3 years. And in 2 for the next 3 years. And in 2 years, when his second daughter was born, he'd name her Evelyn. So she'd always know. So she'd always remember. That impossible was just an opinion. And opinions miss at 3,200 meters. Inside the conference room, the colonel was still waiting for Thorne's answer. You were about to tell us where you learned to shoot like this, Staff Sergeant. Thorne sat back down. I grew up in Wyoming, sir. My father taught me. He ran cattle on 4,200 acres outside Cody. Coyotes were a problem. He gave me a rifle when I was 9 and told me that things that threaten what you care about don't stop because you want them to. Your father was military? Marine Corps. Scout sniper. Gulf War. Taught me everything he knew about reading wind and distance. And he taught you everything? He taught me to shoot. Thorne paused. My mother taught me everything else. Your mother? Thorne was quiet for a moment. The room waited. My mother died when I was 7. Pancreatic cancer. Her voice was steady, clinical, the same tone she used for ballistic calculations. She told my father to teach me, and he did. The colonel waited, but Thorne didn't elaborate. Some stories weren't meant for conference rooms. Some legacies lived in the space between words. And he taught you well, the colonel said finally. Yes, sir, he did. The colonel wrote something in his notes, closed the folder. Staff Sergeant, I'm recommending you for the Soldier's Medal. Not for the shots, for staying in position under direct fire while your body was shutting down. That's valor. Respectfully, sir, I'd prefer the commendation go on my record without a ceremony. Why? Because a ceremony means a story, and stories get distorted. I'd rather the data speak for itself. The colonel studied her, then nodded. The data speaks pretty loudly, Staff Sergeant. The meeting ended. Thorne stood, walked to the door. Her feet were still wrapped, still damaged, but she moved with the same economy of motion she'd shown on the ice shelf. Nothing wasted, everything calculated. In the hallway, Keller caught up to her. Thorne, she stopped. I'm writing a letter, for your file, about what happened up there. Not just the shots, everything else. The 21 minutes, the choice you made, what it cost you. You don't need to do that, sir. I need to, because someday someone's going to look at your record. They're going to see the numbers. 3,218 meters, 11 confirmed, minus 34 degrees. And they're going to think they understand what happened, but they won't. Not unless someone writes down the part that doesn't fit in a data table. Thorne didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "Thank you, Captain. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for everything." She walked away, down the hall, toward medical, toward recovery, toward whatever came next. And Keller stood there thinking about Dmitry Volkov, about a man who traveled halfway around the world to lie on a mountain and kill people he'd never met for reasons that probably made sense to him at the time, about professional respect exchanged across impossible distance, about the moment when Volkov realized the person shooting back was better than he was, about the fact that war reduced everything to math: distance, wind, time, hit or miss, live or die, and about a woman who understood that math better than anyone he'd ever met, who'd bet her life on it, who'd won, but who'd also paid, in pounds of muscle, in inches of dead tissue, in nights of sleep that would never come easy again. The bullet doesn't know who fired it, but the shooter knows everything else. And sometimes, Keller thought, that knowledge is the heaviest weight of all. 3 weeks after Fort Carson, Evelyn Thorne stopped sleeping. It didn't happen all at once. It started small, waking at 0300 instead of 0500, then 0200, then not falling asleep at all until 0100, and waking 40 minutes later with her heart hammering and her hands gripping the sheets like she was holding a trigger that wouldn't break. She didn't dream about the shot. That was the strange part. She didn't replay the 5.8 seconds or hear the crack of the rifle or see the thermal signature collapse on the ridgeline. She dreamed about the minutes between, the 21 minutes between the first shot and the second. The 21 minutes when the enemy sniper was walking rounds toward her position, 3 meters away, then overhead, then close enough that she could feel the concussion of the impact in her chest. In the dream, she was lying on the ice shelf, perfectly still, waiting for the wind window. And a voice, not hers, not anyone's, just a voice, kept saying the same thing. "He's going to hit you before the window opens." And she'd answer, every time, the same answer, "I know," and she'd stay. That was the part that woke her up. Not the fear, the certainty. The absolute ice-cold certainty that she had chosen to stay in a position where a bullet could have killed her. And she had made that choice with the same calm she used to calculate spindrift. She'd chosen the math over her own survival. And the part of her brain that kept humans alive, the ancient lizard part that screamed, "Run," when death was close, couldn't forgive her for it. Her cat noticed first, a gray tabby named Euler, after the mathematician. She'd found him behind a dumpster at Fort Benning during sniper school. He started sleeping on her chest at night, 14 pounds of fur and purr pinning her to the mattress. Cats know. They always know. Sergeant First Class Wyatt Dalton noticed second. They were on the range at Fort Carson, running a standard qualification drill at 1,800 meters. Routine for Thorne. She could do this distance in her sleep. Or at least she used to be able to. Her first group was tight, 3 rounds within a 6-inch circle, normal. Her second group opened up, 9 inches, still passing, but not Thorne's standard. Her third group, she pulled the 4th shot, not by much, maybe an inch of trigger movement instead of the clean, straight-back press that was as natural to her as breathing. But Dalton saw it through his spotting scope. He didn't say anything on the range. He waited until they were cleaning weapons in the armory. "You pulled one." Thorne didn't look up from her barrel. "I know." "You never pull shots." "I know." "What's going on?" "Nothing." Dalton set down his cleaning rod. He turned on the bench to face her fully. "Eve, I've shot beside you for 3 years. I know your groups better than I know my own. Something's off." She stopped cleaning. Her hands were still, perfectly still, the way they always were, steady as a surgical instrument, but her jaw was tight, and Dalton could see the muscle jumping just below her ear. "I'm not sleeping." "Since when?" "Since Alaska." Dalton was quiet for a moment. He'd been in the Army for 14 years. He'd seen this before. Different people, different triggers, same pattern. "Have you talked to anyone?" "I'm talking to you. I mean professionally." Thorne's hands resumed cleaning, methodical, precise. The conversation was over as far as she was concerned. But Dalton wasn't the kind of man who communicated in silences. He pushed. "Eve, listen to me. What you did up there, lying on that shelf while rounds impacted around you, that's not just a ballistic event. That's a trauma event. Your body was in a kill zone for 21 minutes, and you overrode every survival instinct you have. That doesn't just go away because the mission was successful." "I'm fine." "You pulled a shot at 1,800 meters. You're not fine." Thorne set down the barrel. She looked at Dalton directly, and for just a moment, her mask slipped enough for him to see what was underneath. Not fear, not weakness, exhaustion. The bone-deep fatigue of a mind that wouldn't stop running calculations on a problem that had no solution. "If I go to behavioral health, it goes on my record. So I'm the only woman in this unit. I'm the first woman to make a confirmed engagement past 3,000 meters. If I show up on a psych referral list 3 weeks after the biggest shot of my career, what story gets told?" Dalton did know it. He hated that he knew it. He hated that in 2024, in the most advanced military on Earth, a woman seeking mental health support after a combat event would still be filtered through a lens that a man wouldn't face. "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to keep shooting until it stops." "That's not a plan. That's avoidance. It's what I've got." She reassembled the rifle, racked it, walked out of the armory without another word. Dalton sat there for a long time, staring at the bench where she'd been sitting. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call he knew Thorne would be furious about. "Major Harding, it's Dalton. We need to talk about Thorne." The next morning, Harding called Thorne into his office. She knew the moment she saw his face. Dalton had called him. "Sit down, Staff Sergeant." "Sir, with respect." "Sit down." She sat. Harding leaned forward on his desk. He was 52, barrel-chested, gray at the temples. He'd commanded Special Forces, ODAs, in 3 countries before taking the ELR program. He didn't waste words, and he didn't play games. "You're not sleeping. It's manageable. You pulled a shot on the range yesterday. 1 shot, 1 inch. 1 inch at 1,800 is 10 inches at 3,600. You know that better than anyone in this building." Thorne said nothing, because he was right. And because the math, her language, her sanctuary, her shield, was being used against her with perfect accuracy. "I'm not pulling you from the program," Harding said, "and I'm not sending you to behavioral health against your will. That's not how I operate." "Then what, sir?" "I'm sending you home." Thorne blinked. "Home?" "Wyoming, 2 weeks mandatory leave, non-negotiable." "Sir, the training module, the acoustic wind assessment, Dr. Mitchell is waiting for." "Dr. Mitchell can wait. Your brain can't." Harding paused. "You're running on fumes, Thorne, and the problem isn't your body. It's that you made a decision on that mountain that your conscious mind is fine with, and your subconscious mind is screaming about. And you need to go somewhere quiet enough to hear both sides of that argument." Thorne stared at him. "You've seen this before. 3 times. Different shooters, different circumstances, same pattern. The mission succeeds, the body survives. And then the mind catches up and says, 'Wait, you almost died.' And it doesn't care that the math worked. It cares that you bet your life on it." He opened a drawer and pulled out a set of leave papers already filled out. 2 weeks. Go to the ranch, see your father, shoot coyotes, whatever you need to do to let your brain process what happened. And when you come back, if you're still not sleeping, we'll talk about next steps. But you're going. That's not a suggestion. Thorne looked at the papers. Something in her chest loosened, just slightly, like a knot that had been pulled so tight it had forgotten it was once loose. Okay. Okay? Yes, sir. Okay. Harding nodded. One more thing. Sir? Dalton didn't betray you. He protected you. There's a difference. The same difference between staying on an ice shelf because you're stubborn and staying because you've calculated the odds. Intent matters. Thorne took the papers. She stood. At the door, she paused. Major. Yeah? Thank you for not making this about what I am. What you are is one of the 12 best shooters in the United States Army. What you're experiencing is what happens to people who do extraordinary things under extraordinary pressure. There's no gender on that, Thorne. There's just the human brain doing what human brains do. The drive from Colorado Springs to Cody took 9 hours. Thorne did it in one stretch, stopping only for gas in a bathroom break at a truck stop in Casper. Euler rode in a carrier on the passenger seat, quiet and watchful. She pulled into the ranch at 18:30. The sun was already dropping behind the Absaroka Mountains. Her father's truck was parked in its usual spot. The porch light was on. Garrett Thorne opened the door before she knocked. He looked the same as he always did, weathered, still, like something carved from the landscape itself. Didn't expect you. Didn't plan it. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way only a parent can look at a child, reading years of data in a single glance. How long? 2 weeks. Your room's the same. He stepped aside. She walked in. The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke and leather and something else. Something that didn't have a name but that Thorne's body recognized before her mind could process it. Home. She put Euler down. The cat immediately began exploring, sniffing corners, claiming territory. Garrett watched the cat with an expression that might have been amusement on someone else's face. That's new. His name is Euler. The math guy. The math guy, Garrett nodded, as if naming a cat after an 18th century mathematician was the most normal thing in the world. For Thorne, it probably was. You eat? Not since Casper. Sit down. He heated leftover stew. She ate. They didn't talk. The silence between them was the same silence that had filled this kitchen for 23 years. Not empty, not cold, just quiet. The silence of two people who had each other's frequency dialed in so precisely that words were often unnecessary interference. After dinner, Thorne washed the dishes. Garrett dried. They moved around the kitchen with the unconscious coordination of a team that had run this drill 1,000 times. Dad. Yeah? I can't sleep. Garrett set down the towel. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. Since when? Since Alaska. He didn't ask what happened in Alaska. He'd already done the math. His daughter went to Alaska with a rifle and came back unable to sleep. The details were operational. The cause was human. How bad? I pulled a shot on the range. For Garrett, this was the equivalent of a doctor saying the patient's heart had stopped. He uncrossed his arms. He pulled out a chair. He sat down. Tell me. And Thorne, who hadn't told anyone the full truth, not Dalton, not Harding, not the debrief board, sat at her father's kitchen table and told him everything. Not the ballistics. He knew the ballistics. The other part. The part where she lay on the ice for 21 minutes while rounds impacted 3 meters from her body. The part where she calculated the probability of being hit, roughly 12% per shot at the enemy's distance and conditions, and decided that 12% was acceptable because Torres's leg was turning gray and 48 hours wasn't available. The part where she chose the mission over herself and felt nothing in the moment. No fear, no hesitation, no bargaining, just the pure, cold clarity of a decision made by mathematics. And the part that came after, the part where her body caught up, where the adrenaline debt came due, where the ancient animal inside her skull started screaming about what she'd done and wouldn't stop. Garrett listened to all of it, every word. His face didn't change. His body didn't move. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without performance. When she finished, the kitchen was so quiet she could hear Euler purring in the next room. Eve, yeah? You're not broken. I know. No, listen to me. You're not broken. You did something that required you to turn off a part of yourself that exists to keep you alive. And now that part is turning back on, and it's angry. That's not damage. That's the system working. Then why can't I sleep? Because sleeping means letting go of control. And your brain has decided that letting go of control almost got you killed, so it won't let you. How do I fix it? Garrett looked at her across the table, and in his eyes, those quiet, steady, unyielding eyes, she saw something she'd never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, never for himself, for her. The kind of fear that a man who has already lost his wife carries like a stone in his chest every day. The fear of losing the only thing left that makes the world make sense. You don't fix it, Eve. You walk through it, he paused. Same way you walk through sniper school. Same way you walk through Benning. Same way you walk through every room full of men who decided who you were before you opened your mouth. You don't go around it. You don't go over it. You go through it. That sounds like something Mom would say. Garrett's face changed, just barely, a shift in the muscles around his mouth that on anyone else would have been invisible. But on Garrett Thorne was an earthquake. It is something your mother would say. She did say it, to me, the night before her last surgery. His voice didn't break, but it bent, like a rifle barrel under extreme cold. Still functional, still true, but carrying a stress it was never designed for. I told her I was scared, and she held my hand and said, Garrett, you don't go around the hard things. You go through them, and I'll be waiting on the other side. He looked at his daughter. I've been looking for the right words for 23 years, Eve. Those are the closest I've found, and they're not even mine. Thorne reached across the table. She put her hand on her father's hand. Garrett Thorne, who hadn't hugged his daughter since she was 7 years old, who communicated in 6-ring phone calls and one-word texts, who had driven 2 hours in silence to watch her enlist without saying a word for or against it. Garrett Thorne turned his hand over and held his daughter's hand. They sat like that for a long time. The stew pot was still on the stove. Euler had fallen asleep on the couch. The wind outside was picking up. Thorne could hear it shifting against the north wall of the house. 32 miles per hour gusting to 40, west-northwest. She couldn't help it. She always read the wind. Even here, even now. But for the first time in 3 weeks, the calculation didn't mean anything. It was just wind. Just air moving over land. No bullet, no trajectory, no one's life on the other end. Just wind. Garrett squeezed her hand once, then let go. He stood up, took his coffee mug to the sink, rinsed it, placed it upside down on the drying rack. Range tomorrow, he said. Range tomorrow. 500 rounds. 500. I'll load tonight. He walked to the reloading bench in the back room. Thorne heard the familiar sounds. The press, the powder measure, the gentle click of primers being seated. The rhythm of it was as steady as a heartbeat, as certain as math. She sat at the kitchen table and closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to listen. The wind against the wall, the press in the back room, Euler breathing on the couch, and somewhere deep beneath the calculations and the discipline and the armor she'd built over 30 years of being underestimated, the faintest pulse of something her father had just given a name to. The thing her mother said before her last surgery, the thing that meant going through. Thorne opened her eyes. She picked up her pencil and her notebook, the same notebook she'd carried on the mountain, and turned to a blank page. She didn't write ballistic data. She wrote 2 words, go through. Then she closed the notebook and went to bed. Euler followed, jumping onto the mattress and settling on her chest with the weight of something warm and alive and unafraid. Thorn lay in the dark, in the room she'd slept in since she was born, and listened to the wind tell its story to the walls of her father's house. At 02:47, she fell asleep. She didn't dream. She slept 5 hours that first night, then 6 the second. By the fourth day back at the ranch, Thorn was sleeping through until 0500, which was as late as her body had ever allowed her to rest. Garrett didn't comment on it. He just made coffee at 0445 every morning and had it waiting on the kitchen table when she came out. Black, no sugar, the same way he'd made it for Lorelei, the same way he'd made it for himself every day since. They shot 500 rounds a day, not at distance, not at targets shaped like men, just at coffee cans and steel plates set between 200 and 600 yards across the ranch land. The same drills Garrett had run her through when she was 9 years old. No calculations, no wind charts, no data notebooks, just the rifle, the target, and the space between. On the fifth day, something happened that neither of them expected. They were on the north fence line, taking turns shooting a steel plate at 400 yards. Thorn had just put 3 rounds dead center. She lowered the rifle and looked at Garrett. "Dad, why did you teach me to shoot?" Garrett lowered his binoculars. He squinted at her the way he squinted at weather, trying to read what was coming. "Coyotes." "No, I mean really." He was quiet for a long time. The wind pushed across the grass in waves. Euler was sleeping in the truck. "Because your mother asked me to." Thorn went still. "What?" 3 days before she died. She couldn't talk much by then, but she grabbed my hand and she said, "Garrett, teach her to be dangerous." He paused. "I thought she meant tough. I thought she meant strong. But your mother was more precise than that. She said, dangerous." And I thought about it for a long time after she was gone, and I realized what she meant. What did she mean? Capable. She meant, give that girl something the world can't take away from her. Not beauty, not charm, not kindness. Though your mother had all three, she meant a skill so deep and so real that no one could ever look at her and decide she was less than what she was. Thorn's hands were trembling, not from cold, not from fatigue, from the sudden, staggering weight of understanding something she'd carried her whole life without knowing its origin. "You never told me that. You never asked." "Dad, I'm asking." Garrett set down the binoculars. He turned to face her fully, which he almost never did during conversation. Garrett Thorn talked to the horizon, to the fence posts, to the sky. He didn't talk face to face, but today he did. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever knew, not because she wasn't afraid, because she was terrified. And she did everything anyway. Every surgery, every treatment, every morning she woke up knowing it was getting worse. And she still got out of bed, still taught third graders how to read." His voice was steady. The words came slow, measured, like rounds being loaded one at a time. "And the thing that scared her most, more than dying, was leaving you in a world that would try to make you small. She knew what this world does to girls who are quiet and smart and different. She knew they'd try to put you in a box. And she wanted to make sure you had something that could break any box they built." "A rifle?" "No, the mind behind the rifle. The discipline, the patience, the refusal to accept anyone else's definition of what's possible. The rifle was just the tool. The weapon was always you." Thorn turned away. She faced the 400-yard plate and raised the rifle and fired 3 rounds so fast the impact sounded like a single, continuous ring of steel on steel. All 3 center, all 3 perfect. She lowered the rifle. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were steady. "Thanks, Dad." "Don't thank me. Thank your mother." "I can't. She's not here." "She's here, Eve. She's been here the whole time. Where do you think the stubbornness comes from? Sure as hell isn't from me." It was the closest thing to a joke Garrett Thorne had made in 23 years. Thorne laughed. It came out broken and raw, halfway between a laugh and something else. And it was the most honest sound she'd made since Alaska. They shot the rest of the 500 rounds in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Lighter, like the air after a storm breaks. On day 9, Thorne called Dalton. Wyatt. Eve, how's Wyoming? Cold, quiet, good. Sleeping better? Not perfect, better. That's how it goes. It comes back in pieces. I need to tell you something. Okay. You were right to call Harding, and I'm sorry I walked away from you in that hallway. You don't owe me an apology. Yeah, I do, because you did something hard. You went against what I wanted because you saw something I couldn't see. That takes a different kind of courage than lying on an ice shelf. Silence on the line. Then Dalton's voice, rougher than usual. You're going to make me emotional, Thorne, and I've got a reputation to maintain. Your reputation is that you're the second best shooter in the unit. Second best? Who's first? I'm hanging up now. Eve. Yeah? We miss you here, all of us. Come back when you're ready. I will. She hung up and felt something shift. Something small but significant, like a piece of herself clicking back into place. 6 weeks later, Thorne was back at Fort Carson, standing in front of a classroom. 12 shooters. The entire ELR unit. Dalton in the front row. Sergeant Jorge Ramos beside him. Master Sergeant Peter Kowalski in the back, arms crossed. She taught the acoustic wind assessment module for the first time. 3 hours of instruction, theory, application, field technique. How to listen for frequency shifts in channeled wind. How to estimate speed from sound. How to integrate audio data into a ballistic solution when visual indicators fail. When she finished, Kowalski raised his hand. Question, Staff Sergeant. Go ahead. My daughter enlisted last week. She wants to be a shooter. The room went quiet. What do you want me to say, Master Sergeant? I want you to tell me she's going to be okay. Thorne looked at him. At the stone face and the soft eyes, and the father underneath all that armor. I can't tell you she's going to be okay. Nobody can promise that. But I can tell you this. If she's anything like her father, she'll have the discipline. And if you teach her what my father taught me, she'll have the rest. What did your father teach you? Thorne glanced at the window. The wind was blowing across the Colorado plains, bending the grass in long, slow waves. He taught me to listen. The class ended. The shooters filed out. Dalton lingered. Good class, Thorne. Thanks. You sleeping? Most nights. Most is good. Most is enough. He left. Thorne packed up her materials. She was the last one in the room. In the hallway, someone had pinned a printed copy of the after-action report from Alaska. Just the summary line. No names, no classification markings, just the words. Confirmed precision engagement at 3,218 meters in blizzard conditions. Minus 34 degrees Celsius. Sustained crosswind 60 to 70 kilometers per hour. 11 confirmed kills. Second round correction. Below it, in black marker, someone had written, "The bullet doesn't know who fired it. It only knows the math." Thorne looked at it for a long moment. Then she pulled a pen from her pocket and added one line. But the shooter knows everything else. She capped the pen, walked down the hallway, pushed through the doors into the Colorado wind. Her phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. One word. Safe? She typed back. Safe. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Then a message. Good. That was Garrett. That was everything he had. And somehow, standing in the parking lot of a military barracks with gun oil on her fingers and the memory of a 5.8-second bullet still ringing in her bones, it was enough. 2 months later, a young woman appeared at the range, 18 years old, determined eyes, trying too hard to look confident. Staff Sergeant Thorne? Thorne turned. Yes, I'm Riley Kowalski, Master Sergeant Kowalski's daughter. He said I should talk to you. Thorne studied her, saw herself at 18, saw the eagerness and the doubt fighting for space in the same body. What do you want, Riley? I want to learn. I want to be a shooter. I want you to teach me. I'm not taking students right now. Riley's face fell. But my dad said, but I'll make an exception. Report to this range tomorrow. 0500. Don't be late. Riley's eyes went wide. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you make your first impossible shot. Over the next 6 weeks, Thorne met Riley at the range every morning. 0500. Rain or shine, cold or hot. She taught her everything. Wind reading, ballistic calculations, trigger control, breathing, the mathematics of distance in time and gravity. But more than that, she taught her how to listen. In week 3, Riley was struggling with a crosswind at 1,200 meters, missing left, then right, then left again. Frustrated to the point of tears. I can't read it. The wind keeps changing. Then stop trying to see it. What? Close your eyes. Riley looked at her like she was crazy, but she closed her eyes. What do you hear? Wind. What else? Riley was quiet, concentrating. It's changing. The sound. It's higher when it's stronger. What frequency? I don't know, maybe 50 hertz? 60? Thorne smiled. The first real smile Dalton had seen on her face in months. 40 to 60, that's the mid-altitude channel. That's what you can't see, but you can hear it. Riley opened her eyes. You're serious. I'm always serious. Now adjust your scope and take the shot. Riley did. And for the first time that day, the bullet went where she aimed it. By week 6, Riley was making shots at 1,800 meters using acoustic wind assessment as her primary input. By week 8, she'd internalized it so completely that she didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. How do you do it? Riley asked one morning. How do you make it look so easy? It's not easy. It's just practiced. I've been doing this since I was 9 years old. That's not what I mean. I mean, how do you deal with people doubting you? Thorne set down her rifle, looked at Riley. Let me guess, someone said you're only here because of your dad. Riley's face went red. How did you know? Because they said the same thing about me. Different reason, same doubt. What did you do? I let the math do the talking. I let the bullet do the work. And I stopped caring what people who'd never made a difficult shot thought about my easy ones. That simple? No, it's not simple at all. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Because humans want to be liked, want to be accepted, want to fit into the picture people have in their heads. But if you want to be good at this, really good, you have to care more about the shot than the opinion. Riley nodded slowly. My dad said you stayed in a kill zone for 21 minutes, that rounds were impacting 3 meters from your position, and you didn't move. Your dad talks too much. Is it true? Thorne was quiet for a moment. Yes. Why? Because moving meant losing the position, and losing the position meant people died. So I didn't move. Were you scared? Terrified. Riley looked surprised. But you stayed anyway. Being scared doesn't change the math, Riley. It just makes it harder to concentrate. And if you're going to do this job, really do it, you need to understand something. The fear doesn't go away. You don't conquer it. You don't overcome it. You just decide it's less important than the mission. How do you decide that? Thorne picked up her rifle, checked the action, looked at Riley with those pale blue eyes that had stared down 3,218 meters of impossible. You remember why you're here. You remember who taught you. You remember that somewhere, someone is counting on you to make a shot they think is impossible. And you proved them wrong. Not with words, with math. On the last day of training, Riley made a shot at 2,000 meters in a crosswind that would have made most shooters pack up and go home. She closed her eyes, listened, adjusted, fired. Perfect center. Thorne watched through the spotting scope, nodded once. You're ready. For what? For whatever comes next. And when people doubt you, and they will, you remember this. Impossible is just an opinion, and opinions miss at 3,200 meters. 2 years later, Thorne received a message, not from Riley, from a commander in theater. Classified location, classified mission, but the message was clear. Sergeant Kowalski made an engagement at 3,100 meters in blizzard conditions, using acoustic wind assessment as primary input. Confirmed hit. She said to tell you, the teacher was right. The wind does talk. You just have to listen. Thorne read the message 3 times. Then she walked to her truck, drove to the range. Called Garrett. 6 rings. He picked up on the 6th. Yeah. Dad, everything okay? Yeah, everything's okay. I just wanted to tell you something. Go ahead. Riley Kowalski just made a shot at 3,100 meters, using the technique I taught her, the technique you taught me. Silence on the line. Not empty silence, full silence, the kind that holds weight. That's good, Garrett said finally. Yeah, your mother would have said more, would have found the right words. I know. But I'll say this, whatever she put in you, whatever she asked me to teach you, it wasn't just for you, it was for them too, for all of them who come after. I know. Good. The line went quiet again, but Thorne didn't hang up, and Garrett didn't either. They just stayed there, connected across 500 miles of wire and air, and all the years between a 9-year-old girl learning to shoot and a 30-year-old woman teaching others to do the impossible. Dad. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For teaching me to listen. That was your mother's idea. I just loaded the ammunition. Thorne smiled, genuinely, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and changed the shape of her face. I love you, Dad. Garrett was quiet for so long, Thorne thought the line had dropped. Then his voice came back, rough, broken, real. I love you too, Eve, more than I have words for. Your mother had the words. I just have the trying. The trying's enough. 6th ring tomorrow? 6th ring. She hung up, stood in the Colorado wind, rifle bag on her shoulder. The sun was setting. The grass was bending. The world was moving at 32 miles per hour west-northwest, and she could hear it all. Not calculating, not measuring, not solving, just listening. Somewhere a bullet still flew. 3,218 meters, 5.8 seconds, 9 lives saved, 11 lives taken. Not because it was impossible, because one woman refused to believe that impossible was anything more than an opinion that hadn't done the math yet. And because a mother told a father to teach his daughter to be dangerous. And a father taught her to listen. And a daughter learned that the bullet doesn't know who fired it, but the shooter knows everything else.